Now we're going to talk about the conflict perspective. When the conflict perspective looks at stratification, they see the whole idea of stratification very differently. It's not necessary. It's not inevitable. Stratification for the conflict theorist results from lack of opportunity and from discrimination and prejudice against the poor, women, and people of color. Well, let's discuss this idea of lack of opportunity for a moment. Now, the first and most important thing that we should talk about when we talk about opportunity is education. We're going to talk about education next week in class when you're going to read the textbook, you're going to take a quiz on education. It's going to be great. For now, let's talk a little bit about jobs and stratification. One of the things that the conflict theorists would point out is that the poor cannot create jobs. Now, we have this whole idea of, if there's a will, there's a way, you have to work really hard, but jobs cannot be created. Our economy has a cyclical sort of pattern where there's job creation and job loss. And if you actually learn a little bit about economics, you'll learn that this is actually built into the system. The rich have the ability to create job opportunities. And job opportunities really do depend on economic, political, technological, and cultural context. For example, if we think about World War II, a lot of people look at this generation and they say that the people of the generation were just the best quality of Americans. Now, I could probably get myself beat up really bad for what I'm about to say, but the conflict theorist is going to challenge that assumption and say, is that true? Were they better people? Were they more hardworking? Were they more honest? And some of you might say, yes, the World War II generation was more hardworking, more honest. They were just better Americans. When you use sociology to look at that generation and today, you have to acknowledge that after World War II, America had one of the largest periods of growth ever experienced. That's when the auto factory was at its height in America, from the 1940s to the 1970s. Okay, we had auto factories all over this country. We were manufacturing. We had lots of jobs. We created the suburbs. People were going out and building houses all over America. The housing industry was booming. People were going to college. There was a GI Bill sending people to college. And there was much more opportunity at that time in history. Now, was it the quality of the people? Were they better Americans, more hardworking? Or was their economic, political, technological, cultural context a context of opportunity? That was a really great time to be alive in America. The government, yes, you served your government. I'm not going to say that didn't happen. A lot of Americans served their government as civilians or in the military. But when they came home, there was a whole booming economy that was ready to create jobs for our grandfathers. When you look at today, a lot of people say, today people are not honest, they're not hardworking, etc., etc. But again, let's look at the economic situation. We're facing a really bad recession. We've got huge deficits. We're not creating manufacturing jobs. Where are the jobs? Where are they going? Is it that today's American is not as good? Or is there less opportunity today? So if you want to compare different generations, you have to compare them in every single way and do a fair comparison. So for the conflict approach, they would say stratification is about lack of opportunity. And at different times in history, different people are going to have different types of opportunity. Whether we're comparing America as a whole, Americans in the 1950s and Americans today, or whether we're comparing the opportunities of the rich and the poor, the opportunities of men and women, the opportunities of African Americans and Native Americans and Asians. So once you start comparing those opportunities, which is a hard thing to compare, the world starts to look a little bit different. So for the conflict approach, lack of opportunity is very, very important for stratification. Well, what other words look important in there? Discrimination and prejudice. Poor, women, and people of color. Well, let's look at that a little bit. Well, discrimination and prejudice. You've probably heard about discrimination and prejudice before. Well, I'm not going to teach you what you've always heard. Because what you've probably heard throughout your whole life is about hate. And when you hear discrimination prejudice, you probably think of a racist. I hate Native Americans. I hate Mexicans. I hate Asians. And the idea here is that old school thinking on racism was about hatred and people who wanted to hurt other groups of people. I want to let you know that sociologists today think about prejudice and discrimination in a very different way. The idea of hating a certain group is not very popular in America, so we don't do that. We've taught our children that hatred is bad. Yet, according to the conflict approach, discrimination and prejudice persist. It's changed. It works differently today. So we have to learn about it. So, let's think about who is discriminated against first. Tall people, short people, beautiful people, ugly people, skinny people, fat people, age discrimination, people with families, people who are single get discriminated against. A lot of my students, I'm a military sociologist, and I used to teach a lot of naval officers and Marines, and they would talk about how in the military there's a bias against single people. And they send single people to do a lot of things because they say, oh, let the people with families go back to their families. So they said there was a bias against single people in the military. There's discrimination against different religions. There's discrimination against different races. There's discrimination against women, homosexuals, different people of different nationalities, and people of different abilities. So there's a lot of discrimination going on. So how exactly does it work? So, like I said, we're not talking about discrimination in terms of I hate those people. We're talking about a different type of discrimination today. Discrimination's new. So, what I want to point out to you is that when you apply for a job, you are in a job pool of applicants who look, in quotes, just like you. If you're applying for a job that requires an associate's degree, everybody who applies for the job will have at least an associate's degree. When I applied for my job in sociology, every applicant that applied for the job had graduate level education in sociology. And they all had teaching experience. We all looked the same. I came to this life lesson through my best friend. She's an actress. She would go to acting roll calls, and she said she'd walk into the room and every actress looked just like her. Because they had advertised, we're looking for a female who is 5'5" at least, blonde hair, blue eyes. And she'd walk into the room for the audition, and there were all women, 5'5", blonde hair, blue eyes. This happens with almost every job in America. Everyone applying for the job has the same qualifications, the same experience. So how does the employer decide who to hire? Is the employer intent on discriminating? No. The employer is not thinking, I hate Asians, I'm not going to hire an Asian. That's not the way discrimination works today. And the conflict theorist wants us to realize that. So we have to think about what happens, how do employers decide on who to pick? So what I'm going to ask you to do is to change your thinking on this. So let's use a similar process of selection. Selecting a roommate. Who do you want to live with if you're going to select a roommate? What makes you feel comfortable with somebody that you're living with? And what might you exclude? What groups might you exclude if you're picking somebody to live with? I've done this experiment with students, and what we've found over and over and over is that when you're going to pick somebody to live with, we tend to want to pick somebody similar to us. If we're clean, we want to live with somebody who's clean. If you're a female, you might generally want to live with another female, not a random guy who, wants to live with you. So what we find is that when you look for a roommate, you look for people who's similar to you. Listen to similar music, wear similar clothes, eat similar food. You want to feel comfortable. You don't want to walk into your house and smell some smell that you just hate because they're cooking their food. You don't want to walk into your house and hear hip-hop music or or sitar or country music. You don't want to hear some type of music that you don't like. You want to feel comfortable. You want to feel like your home is a place that everything you're okay with. Well, I just snuck in the answer to our question. How do employers make decisions about people who to work with? Well, they tend to choose people who they're comfortable with, people who are similar to them. Okay? Bosses and workers want to feel comfortable with people they work with. They don't want to, they want to feel like they can come into work, and if they like football, they would love the idea of talking to their coworker about football. Now, here's what I want you to realize. There's two important things that you really need to realize about discrimination. Number one, the vast majority of positions where you get to hire somebody tend to be controlled by the rich, generally people who are men, generally heterosexuals, generally white men. When you look at this sort of statistically, the overall pattern for our nation tends to have leaders, people in managerial positions who are men, who are white, who have money. So who do they feel comfortable hiring? Well, they feel comfortable hiring other white people. They feel comfortable hiring other men. They feel comfortable hiring other heterosexuals. If you have money like them, maybe they might feel more comfortable hiring applicants who have money. And they don't see this as discrimination. They don't say, oh, I don't like black people. They might say, no, I don't like hip-hop. Or, I don't feel comfortable around homosexuals, so I'm not going to hire one. Well, you're in the position to hire people and give them jobs that, they need to survive. And you, the boss, are making the decision not to hire that person. Which, it's a very powerful thing. And that's discrimination. They make the decision based on comfort. Not on hate, but on comfort. The conflict perspective argues we need to change the way how we think about comfort. Should a boss feel comfortable? When I interviewed for my job at Copper Mountain College, I interviewed with the president and the vice president, who were at the time a different person than who has the job now. And during my interview, they wanted to talk about baseball. You know what I did? I started talking about baseball. I don't know anything about baseball, but I started talking about it because I wanted them to feel comfortable, and I wanted the job. Now, not only do we need to change the way we think about comfort, we need to change the way we think about race, gender, class, ability, physical appearance, things like that. Because, again, race is not just skin color, white, black skin, white skin. In our society, we racialize everything. We racialize food, we racialize movies, we racialize music, we racialize clothing. So a boss could say, I don't feel comfortable hiring that black guy because he's going to listen to black music and wear black clothes. And I don't think that looks professional for our organization. Now, is it that he doesn't like black guys, or is it that he doesn't like music and he doesn't like clothing? Same thing with gender. We think, gender and sex are about having a penis or a vagina. But gender and sex go beyond having a penis or a vagina, just like race goes beyond having black skin or white skin. Gender is also related with things like hobbies. So if a boss likes baseball, for example, and during a job interview, the boss starts talking about baseball. Now, male applicants might be able to go with that and start talking about baseball. Yes, I like that hobby too, because in our society, baseball is a masculine sport and a lot of men pay attention to baseball. Now, the female might say, I don't know anything about baseball, and sort of just sit there silently and not get the job because the boss said, I didn't really like talking to her. It didn't make me feel comfortable. It seems like a silly example, but I'm trying to argue that this is actually a pervasive thing in our society, where gender And sex, we think, is just penis or a vagina, and it includes a lot more. It includes the color of the clothes we wear, the topics we know about, the hobbies we do, and all of those things matter to getting jobs in America. Because everybody looks the same on paper for an application. It's all about the clothes we wear, the hobbies we have, and whether we share those hobbies and interests with the bosses. That's how you get a job. Please go to your discussion board